All right, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great day so far and that your week has gone well. So today we've got an exciting topic for ourselves, and that is on sales. But as always, before we get started, if you would, let's get in our stretch. So everybody up. Little Elvis Presley never hurts. All right, and to your right and to your left. You take it all the way back. And now down to your toes. Little twist to the left. Little twist to the right. And now we have it. All right. All right. Always good to get the blood flowing. So today's a little bit different, gang. And in this case, because of a technical snafu, I'm going to record the webinar. We don't have anyone else on the line but me. But we do want to make sure that the content is available and that you're able to rely on it for doing the homework in between the sessions. And that's just a quick reminder. The homework is a big part of what we're doing. So make sure that you're allocating the time to get the midweek task done. And as always, if you need any help with that, give me a buzz and we'll schedule our usual time. So a couple of things from last week. In particular, that second one, and that is to test and measure. We want to start testing and measuring all of our marketing activities to ensure that we're making progress and to also make sure that we're getting the kind of leads that we're looking for, and at the same time understanding which lead generation source is giving us the best results. The great thing about math, the great thing about numbers is that they are not emotional. They really don't care what they are, but they are specific and they are direct. So as people are coming to the business, we want to make sure that we find out how they heard about us, where they came from, and ultimately it's going to let us decide where to invest our money in marketing strategies that work, and also where to pull back on some money in areas that aren't working. The reality, or I should say the old adage is that half my marketing works, half of it doesn't. I'm just not sure which is which. We're going to blow up that mindset by testing and measuring and being positive and committed to our marketing plan, because we know what's working and what isn't working. And then also at the bottom, defining the ideal customer. A great place to learn about our favorite customers is by asking our favorite customers where they came from, why they buy from us, and using that insight to craft our marketing messages so that we can go out in the marketplace and find more of those A and B clients and fewer C and D clients. So being specific about what we're looking for from a client perspective is crucial to moving the business forward on a profitable basis. And of course, it all starts with mindset. So as we've seen before, we need to spend our time above the line, where we're taking ownership for our actions, we're accountable for our results, and responsible for what's happening in our business, our departments, and our personal life. And what we have to resist is the temptation to be below the line, where we find blame, we're making a litany of excuses for our level of success, and in some cases where we're in flat-out denial that we're doing better than we actually are. And one way to blow up denial is to actually get the numbers around what's happening. So when we're below the line, we're a victim, in that we're being responsive to external forces, and so we're really just kind of floating along with the current and not having the direction as to where we want to drive our boat. When we're above the line, we're the victor, where we're steering the ship, we've set goals, we're marching towards them, we have good game plans, we have good action plans, and we're taking those steps to get results on a consistent basis. And the great part about this is that ultimately it is your choice. Are you going to invest time being below the line, or are you going to be above it? And the reality is that during the course of a day, we are going to hit speed bumps, and those speed bumps are going to drive us below the line. And what we have to be able to do very efficiently, very effectively, is get back above it. Because above the line is where we make progress, and below the line is where we sit still. And we've got too many things to knock out to be sitting still. Also, another one that we've seen, the only failure is the failure to participate. And when we talk about giving 100%, as you listen to this webinar, really take the learnings and apply them to the homework so that you can move the business forward, or your area of the business forward, between now and when we talk in 2 weeks' time. And of course, we've got to stay open-minded. You know, it's great to have teenagers. They're a wonderful social experience, but oftentimes they think they're a heck of a lot smarter than they are. And what we find is that it doesn't only apply to teenagers. We see business owners, we see managers. From time to time, we'll see ourselves putting up this barrier to learning additional information because we think we already know all the things that we need to. And the reality is our growth comes in those nuggets that we find when we talk with people and can learn those subtleties of what they're doing that's moving their business forward, moving their team forward, and we can take those learnings and apply them to our team and our business as well. So let's set aside the I knows today and be open-minded around sales, because ultimately, to have a business, you need to have sales. You can have the greatest product in the world, the most wonderful service, but if nobody actually pays you for it, you won't be in business for very long. So today we're going to unpack some mindset around sales. We're going to replace it with some new laundry, so to speak, and then we're going to repack it so that you've got a different perspective as to how to improve your conversion rate and how to be effective as a salesperson. Okay. So what I want to get out of this workshop is I reflect on some of the notes that came across last time I was trying to record this. There really were three themes that were coming through. The first theme was that they wanted to lay out the sales process and come up with a way to define it. Secondly, they wanted to be better at linking the steps together so that we don't go into voicemail, eternity, or emails back and forth without establishing the next time we're going to talk. And the third was just to understand the overall conversion rate and how to define and be able to predict what kind of leads we need to generate to get the kind of sales that we need for the business to be successful to finish 2014 and also springboard into 2015. Okay. So those were the three big ones, and we will hit all of those as we have our conversation today. So as we started with last week, you know, the general market, the overall demographic, the potential for your business, those are the suspects. We don't know much about these people. We know that they fall in a general demographic, but we don't know them personally. We haven't run into them. They haven't reached out to us. They're just a raw number. So they could be the number of households, number of people with automobiles. You know, it's a huge number typically. And these are people that we haven't had contact with. What happens is they reply to some of our marketing, and we talked about the marketing element of it last week, and because they've replied to or we've had some kind of interaction with, they now move from suspect to prospect, and at that point they have officially entered our sales pipeline. All right, so that's the trigger. They become a prospect when we learn more about them, when they've taken on some kind of activity, and that's when we would really put them into the sales hopper. Okay. So they take action, and we have collected their details. Now, from a details perspective, certainly first name, last name. We would love to get the email address because that's a great, low-cost way to stay in touch with them. And if we can get their phone number, that's wonderful as well. But certainly name and email address are the two that we're after. Another way to look at it is the sales vacuum. And so you've got the marketplace, and again, those are the suspects. We've got a nice USP and guarantee that we talked about last time. We've used that in our variety of marketing strategies, which are coming across the bottom. And because they've responded to one of these strategies, now they're a prospect. Okay? We've qualified the information. We've walked with them. We've walked through with them the offers that we bring to the marketplace, and we started to get a feel for what it is that they're looking for. We've narrowed down to something that can help them specifically. And by that I mean we found the right solution for them based on our offerings. And typically that might be a little niche that we're attacking. But what's happening as we go through this interaction of the sales vacuum, they're starting to move down the sales pipeline. They're moving through our sales process, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. Right. Now typically, as you think of salespeople, there are 4 kinds that are out there. Okay? And 2 of which have given some of the bad name to salespeople that are out there. We're going to cover those in a second. But the first one is the order taker. And when I think of the order taker, I think of someone that works at the post office. You know, they're behind the counter, they're waiting patiently, they're very helpful when you get there, but they're not doing much proactive. They're really just kind of waiting for the customer to show up to buy something they need. The same thing could apply to Starbucks. The same thing could apply to a deli, where they're not driving the traffic and they're basically playing catch. Order takers are valuable. You see them in retail all over the place. The reality, though, is that they don't make much money. And the reason they don't make much money is because they're not adding a lot of value to the company. They're basically there just waiting for someone to buy something. Okay? So when you think about hiring a salesperson as who's an order taker, this is that $10, $12 an hour kind of deal. Beyond the order taker, you get the product pusher. And this is that old traditional copier salesman that used to go around high-rise buildings and go door to door. They talk at length about what the product does. They talk a lot about the bells and whistles, a lot about the features. They ask very few questions about what the client actually needs. And they try to have a one-stop solution for everything. The product pusher really has gone by the wayside. You don't see a lot of that. This was the origination of the no soliciting signs that would go on doors. And this is a dinosaur that's dying on the product pusher side. The overseller. So this is the one that really has given the black eye to the profession of selling. And that is someone will say anything just to get the deal done. They'll make promises they know that they can't fulfill. They will use lots of closing techniques to get people to say yes. And a great way to tell if you have an overseller as a salesperson is that the retention of the clients will be very poor. They will felt like they were coerced into saying yes. Over time, they'll come to resent that, and they'll never do business with the salesperson again. So if you have a salesperson who's got a lot of one-time sales in an industry that should have repeat sales, then you need to take a look at how they're going about their sales process, because chances are pretty good that they are an overseller. Pardon me. And the last one, and the one that's where we want to strive to be, and that is the problem solver. So basically, as a problem solver, you've got a business that's very good at delivering a product or service. You talk to a candidate who needs that kind of product or service. You seem to build some rapport and hit it off a bit, and then it's very natural to try to work it out so that you guys can be in business together. So as a problem solver, you're asking a lot of questions, you're building a lot of rapport, you're finding out a lot about the individual, and then you're making a recommendation to something that will scratch that proverbial itch that they have so that they can become an effective client, not only for the first sale, but for many, many sales to come. So the problem solver is where we want to be, and that's what sales education and training is all about. Now, we like to define sales as professionally helping other people to buy. As you look at the marketplace and you look at consumer consumption, people love to buy stuff, absolutely love it, but they don't like to be sold. And so the reason we've turned the definition on its head is because what we're trying to do is be a problem solver, much like the last slide. We want to be that type 4 salesperson, and we know that people like to spend money. I mean, you can see the debt numbers around the country, although they've come down nicely in the last couple of years. With the economy getting stronger, there's a good chance that they'll turn and they'll start to go up again. The debt numbers will start to go up. That being said, people are out there spending money all the time. People are spending money in your industry all the time. And the challenge becomes, how do we get the ones that we should be working with to come and buy from us? All right? And that's a marketing gig that we talked about last week. But once they put their hand up, then we have to be very good at getting them to say yes, paying for the product or service, and then having, of course, that money clearing it deposited into your bank account. And the way people become professional, and part of what you're doing right now, is that they train, they study, they invest in themselves from an education perspective so they can always get better and better at their craft. And there are a couple of resources I'd like to recommend with regards to sales training. The first one is a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, C-I-A-L-D-I-N-I, and again, the book is called Influence. It talks about the psychology of selling. The second book I'd like to recommend is Mastering the Art of Sales by Tom Hopkins. Again, talks about the psychology of selling, and also introduces some good questioning techniques which are vital when it comes to being a good salesperson. And the third, just because I like his style, is The Little Red Book of Sales by Jeffrey Gitomer. A very easy read, some real practical things that you can put in place immediately that will ultimately help your conversion rate. And the conversion rate is simply defined as the number of people that you need to talk to before somebody says yes. So one of the homework assignments I'd ask you to jot down is that you need to calculate your conversion rate so that when you start building your game plan for 2015, it's based on numbers that are supported by the actual results coming out of the market. Okay? So that conversion rate is an important place to start. Now, one of the things that we talk about, much like the slides in the beginning, is that space between your ears. So there's some beliefs around sales that we need to unpack because it's going to, let me put it this way. If we stay with the same beliefs we have today, then we'll keep getting the same results. So what we need to do is go in and change some of those beliefs around sales so that we can get better results. And a belief is simply something you hold to be true at this time. Okay, that's the difference between a belief and a value. Values you hold to be true at all times. A belief is something you hold to be true today. Okay? So if you would, grab a sheet of paper and let's jot down what I say, and the important part of this exercise is you have to be totally honest with yourself. Okay? So when I say salesperson, what are 3 things that come to mind? And please, if what you're thinking right now is a trusted advisor looking for my best interest, I think we're kidding ourselves. Usually when I say what are 3 beliefs you have around salespeople, the terms that come out are fast talker, self-interest, focused on money, slimy, liars. It gets pretty bad, actually. And if you were to look at 10 things that people say when it comes to salespeople, 9 of them are going to be very negative, and 1 is going to be neutral at best. Okay, so the inherent beliefs around salespeople is not positive. In fact, it's very negative. What's interesting, though, when I ask people 3 beliefs they have around their customers, this is also pretty negative. I'll get things like lifeblood of business, and that could be a positive. Undecisive, not honest, fishing for information, friends, which is, again, a positive one. So when you think of customers, if you're really honest with yourself, this won't be 9 negative to 1 positive, but it's probably 6 or 7 negative to 2 neutral and 1 positive. All right, so it's not as bad as salespeople, but still not as positive as you would think before this exercise. And then the last one, your product or service, this one's easy. If you list 10 things, they're all positive. Everyone loves what they do, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. And so here, maybe you'll get 8 positive, 2 neutral, 9 positive, maybe 1 negative, although that would be surprising. So to recap, what you have here is when you think about the beliefs around salespeople, you have predominantly negative. When you think about the beliefs you have around customers, you are relatively negative. And when you think about the product and service, you're very positive. Well, my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Highsmith, taught me at Jefferson Elementary in Elmhurst, Illinois, that a negative plus a positive is still a negative. Let me say that again. A negative plus a positive is still a negative. And so what's going on here, gang, is that you're doing something you don't like, talking to people you don't really like about something you love. And that is why your conversion rate has room to improve. Now, we don't need to worry about product and service because you're obviously already good at that. From a marketing perspective, as we talked about last week, you're going to be talking to prospects that fall more into your A and B classification than in your C and D classification. So you'll actually be talking to people that you like more than the ones you're talking to today. So that's great. So that'll settle itself out. And the top one, from a salespeople perspective, we've got to address this head on. So there are 3 things that you can do to retool your thinking around salespeople. Now, one of them we've already covered, and that is to train. You need to become better educated when it comes to sales. What are good questioning techniques? How do I build rapport effectively? What is a good process that I can follow? And the sales process is the second one. Right? You need to come up and develop a sales process that's going to have anywhere from 4 to 7 steps. And for each step, you're going to define what you're going to cover. So it becomes very systematized how you take people through the sales process. And by being systematized, you're going to be a much better listener, which is the third element of how you get better at sales. Embrace the fact that you need to have sales to be successful in business. You need to have sales really to be successful in anything. And so between the training and the education, the process, and the ability to build rapport with people that you respect, those 3 things together are going to help retool how you think about sales. So if there's one investment I'd ask you to make from a knowledge perspective between now and the end of the year, it is to invest in yourself in sales and sales skills, and really take to heart the homework in this session, because that's going to make the biggest impact as you launch into 2015. Now, when you think about sales, and as part of our questioning process, you've got 2 ways people make decisions. They make them emotionally, and they make them based on logic. If you go back to that 4 type of salespersons, the product pusher very much focused on the logic side of the equation. Told you about the bells and whistles. Told you about how cool some of the things were going to be. All right? What we find, though, is we need to invest time on the emotional side of the equation. So as you talk with people about your product and service, you have to understand how that's going to benefit them from a profit perspective, from a time perspective, from a relationship with their spouse or their children perspective. Get the emotional side bought in before you go after them with the logic. This is easy to think about for a long period of time, and ultimately maybe never say yes to buying something on the logic side. This, once the emotions are high enough, we will pull the trigger. It is human nature that once the emotions are strong, we're much more apt to say yes quickly than if all we're doing is basing it on the logic side. Okay. Sorry. So much so that you're really looking at 80% of the decision is going to be based on emotion, and only 20% is going to be based on logic. And let me say that one more time. As you start laying out your questions and your sales process, make sure that you have a heavy emphasis on the emotion questions and a lighter emphasis on the logic questions. Now, likewise, much like sales, 3 beliefs you have about money. And when typically answers to this are there's not enough, or there's too much month left, or days in the month when the money runs out. Now, money, it's interesting. In 1976, I want to say, 75, money moved off the gold standard. So prior to that, it was backed by a hard asset. And now it's really backed by confidence. In the case of the U.S., it's backed by the notion that the U.S. will always pay their bills. But there is no hard, tangible asset supporting that money. It's strictly an idea backed by confidence. And so the question becomes, how do you build confidence around an idea? And in this case, in particular, how do you build confidence around the idea of selling? And the way you would build confidence around anything is by understanding the numbers, understanding how it works, being well educated in what it's about. And when those things come together, because you know what the outputs will be from your input, and in this case the input is money, it's a lot easier to make that investment. Right? And we'll talk more about that as we talk about sales process and the conversion rate. But if you know you have to talk to 10 people to get a sale, and you know that that sale is going to result in $1,000 for you, would you be willing to invest $200 in marketing to get $1,000 out? And the answer is, of course. Right? But you have that confidence because you know what the conversion rate is going to be. You know what the outcome will be from the amount of money you're putting in. Okay? So you have to have the confidence, and by giving confidence, what we're referring to is that your prospects will know that you're going to deliver on your promise. If you deliver on your promise, then your business will be successful. And a lot of it is really based around communication. Now, I love the internet. I think it's great. I think social media is great. I think all those things are great. I also think that we will be getting belly to belly with people that are prospects, soon to become happy customers for a long, long time. In fact, I think I'll be doing it the rest of my life. So when it comes to communication, we have to be able to interact with people. And we've always considered communication to be the response we get, right? If I'm saying something and the person I'm saying it to is not getting it, the responsibility is on me to change the way I say it, not on them to change the way they hear it. We go back to above and below the line. If I want to be above the line, then I will take ownership for my communication style. If I want to be below the line, then I'll blame them for not understanding. All right? So we want to stay above the line when it comes to communications as well, and focus on the response that we're getting to see if we're getting the message across. Now, communication is typically broken up into three forms. You've got the words you use, you've got the inflection in your voice, and you also have your body language. Now, this study was done some years ago. In the second pass that I've seen, the percentages are just about the same. But when you think about the way we communicate, the words we choose represent very little of the message that comes across. The way we say it is much more important than the words that we choose. But the big one, the Mac Daddy, is the body language when we're saying it. So what's interesting is that nearly 93% of the message all comes through how we're positioning our body and the way that we're saying it, much less than the words that we're choosing. And if you have children, especially small children still today, you've seen this in practice. You know, the way you say something to your child is just as important as the words that you're saying, because if there's differences between the two, if the words that you're using are very loving, but the way you're saying it is very aggressive, they're not picking up on the loving part. They're picking up on the aggression. Okay? So the voice and the body language are crucial to make sure that we're getting our message across appropriately. And part of that is driven by NLP, and this is fantastic. So NLP, and the Cialdini book will address this as well, but what we're looking for is matching and mirroring, but not mimicking. So what that means is that there's certain ways to test to see if we're building rapport. So next time you're out with your spouse, or maybe the next time you're in a business setting, as you're talking to them and you think it's going pretty well, I want you to subtly lean in a little bit and pay attention to what they do. If they lean in as well, or maybe they shift their body to the left or the right, they have some kind of physical change in response to your physical change, that means you guys are on the same page. That means things are going pretty well, unless they lean back. If you lean in and they lean back, things are not going as well as they should be. All right? So that's what we mean by matching and mirroring. What we want to do is be responsive to the body language changes that other people are doing. Now, by don't mimic, what that means is that if they touch their face, you touch your face. If they run their fingers through their hair, you run your fingers through their hair. You start doing exactly the same things. Here's what will happen. Within about 90 seconds, the person will not like you. And they won't even know why they don't like you. They'll just know that they're very uncomfortable with the setting that they're in. So if you want to test to see if you're moving well in rapport, have some physical body changes and see what the other person does. If they're changing in concert with you, that's good news. If they're doing the opposite, especially if you lean in and they lean back, that's bad news. And just remember that we're not going to repeat their body language. Okay? So this is a great social science experiment. I encourage you to try it next time you're out. You'll be surprised, and you'll be surprised at the results, and you'll be intrigued by the fact that you now have a technique to understand how you're hitting it off with somebody. Different ways that people communicate. So there typically are three. Some people are visual, some are auditory, and some are kinesthetic. And where this becomes important is that in the terms that you use when you talk to them. So someone who's visual will actually look up when they think, because they're looking for a picture, because that's how they process information in pictures. They'll use terms like, do you see what I mean, or can you picture that? And they'll be able to understand those kind of questions and relate to them. People that are auditory will actually look straight while they're thinking, almost like they're looking you in the eyes, but they're not. They're looking a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. And this can be a little strange when it happens the first time because you want to move your eyes to catch theirs, but they're not actually looking at you. The terminology they use are things like, how does that sound, or can you hear that? That sounds good to me. And then kinesthetics are very feeling-oriented. So typically when they think of something, they'll look down, and the words that they'll respond to is, does that feel right? Can you put your arms around it? Now the reason that's important is that I want to change my languaging to the person that I'm talking to. Because in doing so, they're going to understand what I'm trying to communicate much more effectively than if they're visual and I say, how does that sound? Or if they're auditory and I say, can you picture that helping you? The reality is they don't process information that way, so they're not fully understanding what you're saying. So just like NLP, what I'd ask you to do is start paying attention to the words people are using. Don't worry about, in the beginning, changing your vocabulary to match theirs. What I want you to do is just to start paying attention and guessing what people are. If you want to have some fun at home, a cool exercise, ask your kids or your spouse or your sisters or brothers to close their eyes and describe their favorite beach. And as they're doing that, I'd like you to identify whether they're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. You'll be surprised at how obvious it is when they start to describe their beach. Cool. Now, if you think about the general population, what we find is that auditories are the least common, that are very high auditories. And what's a little bit ironic is that's what our school system is based on. It's based on auditory. So if you've got, if you're teaching a class or if you're coaching a sport and you want to be more effective at communicating, you can actually put the students or the athletes through the back score, and that way you can be a more effective instructor. And it actually works great. I did it for a middle school soccer team. All right, so those are the modalities of communication. And what I'd ask you to do over the next couple of weeks is just pay attention to the kind of terms that people use when they describe things. The other thing many of you guys have seen before is the DISC profile. And the DISC profile, much like a Myers-Briggs, is a 4-quadrant profile that describes how people, how they behave, right? But it's a behavioral study, but at a pretty high level, right? It's not going to tell you their emotions, but it will tell you how do they process, how do they think, and how can I relate to them best. So you've got people that are task-oriented and people that are people-oriented, right? So I'm a task-oriented guy. I love to-do lists. I love knocking stuff off. You've got people that are outgoing, and you've got people that are reserved. So when I think of outgoing people, they also typically will make decisions faster. When I think of reserved people, they'll also typically make decisions slower. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to walk around the 4 quadrants and talk about some of the characteristics. So people that are high Ds, I like to think of as native New Yorkers. They talk in bullet points. They think in bullet points. If you're telling them a story, they want you to speed it up. They'll make a little circular motion with their index finger. I can tell you from experience that that is not a very good thing to do with your spouse or with your mom, just as an aside. Typically, we'll make decisions quickly. And if you think about a sales interaction, and if we use an hour as the average amount of time that we're going to spend, with someone who's a high D, you may spend 30 minutes. You might spend 20 minutes. You don't need to spend a lot of time on family because they're really not interested in your family. You don't need to spend a lot of time on the weekend because they really don't care what you did this weekend, and they don't really want to tell you what they did. What they want to do is get down to business, okay? Like a native New Yorker would. Opposite of D's, you got people that are called high I's, and D stands for dominant, I is influencer. And these are the people of the world. They love to be in networking groups. They're very comfortable in social settings. They know a bunch of jokes. They typically have a pretty good hearty laugh. And they are interested in the personal side of a relationship. So if you're, again, average sales calls an hour, you're going to have to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours with people that are high I's. When I was at Lexington Furniture, I had the opportunity to go down to Honduras to talk to some manufacturers. And the way it worked was that when you were in Honduras and you went out with someone, you spent an hour and 45 minutes on the social stuff. That may be a long dinner, that might be a couple of cocktails, that might be talking about family, and it was like the last 10 to 15 minutes, it was all business. And what I found was that if I didn't invest that hour and a half in the social, I didn't get to the 10 minutes. So with a high I, you've got to pay attention to or give them space from a time perspective on the personal side. S stands for steady, and steadies like to move at a very predictable pace. The thing about people that are high S's, and they can be very personable, that's why they're on the people side. But for them, when you say 10 o'clock, they expect 10 o'clock. They use your word and your actions that match your word as a confirmation that they should do business with you. All right? So when you make a commitment to an S, you got to keep it. And you got to keep it down to the minute. Now you can call someone at 9 o'clock and say 10 o'clock's not, I won't have it done, so can I get it to you at 2? And they'll say, yeah, it's fine, no problem. But if you show up with it at 10:10, you've lost credibility. All right? So that's what S's are. And then C stands for compliant. These people are very detail-oriented. I've always thought of them as cost accountants, computer programmers, engineers, the kind of people that like to have a project and go work on it and come back when it's done. If you're going to go meet a high C, and some of this applies to an S as well, but especially a C, your goal from a sales perspective is just to get to the next meeting. You're going to have to give them information to review. They're going to critique the punctuation and some of the adjectives that you choose. They're going to go through the copyright in your brochures and find things that they don't like. They're going to spend a lot of time thinking through the process. And if you pressure them, even if they're interested, the answer is going to be no. So if you look at the 4, D's, short sales cycle, I's, short sales cycle in duration of time, but within that time, you're going to have long sales discussions. C's and S's, a longer sales cycle, and especially for C's, you're going to have to give them information and things to check out along the way. Okay. So by understanding someone's disc, by understanding someone's back, and being able to modify our style to theirs, it's going to allow us to build rapport. Now, and this is very important again. I've had people say before that this sounds manipulative, okay? And we're not trying to manipulate anything. What we're trying to do, because remember where we started, we're talking to people that we believe we can help. We're talking to people that have said that they're interested in our product and service, and we're really good at what we do. So they're interested, we're good at it, we're interested in them. It's not manipulative to try to get them to have them say yes and to work with them. What would be manipulative is if I use these skills, if I use these strategies to try to get someone who's a bad fit to say yes, that overseller. So by being a good problem solver, we're going to be good at building rapport. We're going to use the tools in our toolkit so that we can make sure that we're working with the kind of people that are great fits for our business, and our business are great fits for them. Now, when you go into the sales process, and here's where I've seen a lot of people go off track. You sit down with a client or a prospective client, and you start talking, and you go into your spiel, and you're a little bit all over the place, and you don't really set it up very well, and so you get to the end of the amount of time you're supposed to have together, and you're looking at your watch, and they're looking at their watch, and you end it with something like this. Well, it was great to talk to you, and let's get back together next week, and we'll talk about, what we'll do next. Right? And what that typically leads to is next week, lots of voicemails back and forth, or maybe a lot of voicemails from you with nothing coming back, emailing back and forth. And the reason is that you didn't have a well-defined sales process, and then for every step of the sales process, you didn't have that great of a purpose. So for every step of the sales process, you need to decide what is it that you're going to cover during that interaction. So much so that, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'll say the same thing at the beginning of a call. Would it be okay if I outlined what we're going to cover today? Right? Very simple. I'm just going to lay out the points from my perspective that I want to get through. And they have always said yes, because they don't know how to buy what I'm selling. So if I can lay out what we're going to cover during the steps, it takes the pressure off them. And because I know what I want to cover, I'm a much better listener and I can focus on what they're saying as opposed to trying to figure out what I'm going to say next. So great salespeople have a purpose for every step in their sales process. And you'll notice, the first couple, would it be okay if I highlighted what we're going to cover today? They're going to say yes. Then you highlight the 2 or 3 things that you're going to cover. In that dialogue, you're going to have good questions. You're going to give them a few ideas. And then as you get towards the bottom, you're going to agree on the next best step. And that's another phrase that I use all the time. And then we'll decide on what's the next best step. Right? That next best step might be that you never see each other again. And that's okay. The next best step might be that you schedule a follow-up call on Tuesday at 10, not sometime next week, Tuesday at 10. Right? But by having these bookends on your sales process at every step, then the middle part takes care of itself because that's a dialogue between 2 people that like each other. We start it strong, we end it strong, and the middle part really is going to navigate itself. So as you're thinking about your sales process, give some thought to, what do I want to accomplish at each step? Why do I have these multiple steps? Because I don't want to be repetitive between steps 2 and 4, so to speak. All right. So come up with a good purpose statement for each step. It's crucial. And it could be the same purpose statement for each one. Can I cover what we're going to, would it be all right if I covered what we're going to run through today? And then have the 2 or 3 things you're going to run to. You can use that same sentence. I've been using that same sentence for 10 years. And it still works as effective as it did 10 years ago. And part of that is questions. And everyone's mom has told the same thing. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in proportion. But when it comes to sales, part of the benefit of having a good sales process is having some killer questions that are in there. And there's a really good book around questions called QBQ, Questions Behind the Questions. And we want to make sure that when you list out the questions you're going to ask at every step, that there is an emotional emphasis on it, that you're getting to the heart of the matter and not just giving them all kinds of logic as to why they should buy stuff. Okay? And there are 3 things you can do, pardon me, especially if you're face-to-face to gauge if you're doing a good job asking questions. So I like to bring coffee or tea. And if you go and sit down with someone and you have 2 coffees, 2 teas, 2 hot chocolates, whatever it is, it has to be warm. Should you be drinking your coffee or your liquid when it's warm or when it's cold? So it's a 50-50 answer. Who thinks that you should be drinking warm coffee? All right. Who thinks they should be drinking cold coffee? Cool. Well, the answer is warm. Because if I'm asking questions and they're talking, I'm drinking warm coffee. If you get to the end of the meeting and you find that, number 1, it didn't go as well as you thought, and number 2, you were drinking cold coffee, it's probably because you were talking too much. Another example, you go to lunch or you go to breakfast. Who should finish eating first? And it should be you. Now, you don't want to wolf down your food, but at the same token, I'm asking questions, they're talking, hopefully not eating while they're talking. I'm paying attention and I'm listening and I'm eating. Okay? So those are 2 very simple things you can do to gauge, am I asking questions like I think I am, or am I really just doing a lot of talking? And another thing that works really well, grab your smartphone and just record the conversation. Not because you want to upload it to TMZ or YouTube later, but because that post-discussion diagnostic or maybe autopsy is going to really provide some insight into what actually happened. You may think you're asking a bunch of questions, and maybe under the heat of the moment you're not. The only way to tell is to record yourself and to then play it back and do a critique over the conversation. And then delete it, and that way no one will, then you don't have to worry about it getting out anywhere. So questions are crucial. There's actually a question process that we go through. And part of it is about change, because people make decisions because they don't like where they are today. So it starts with dissatisfaction. Right? D stands for dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction is something I don't like about the current status, the current situation. But if all we do is focus on dissatisfaction, we're just really making them feel bad. So there has to be an element of vision. How could it be better? Both of these are working very much on emotion. Okay? What you don't like about the current situation, here's how awesome it can be if you work with us. The first steps then are picking a program that fits. And that's probably where the logic slides in the most. Giving them something they can afford, giving them something they can handle from a time commitment. So the first two are geared around emotion. The F is really geared towards logic. And together, these have to be greater than their natural resistance to change. So again, D stands for dissatisfaction, V stands for vision, F stands for first steps, and R stands for resistance to change. And it's those great questions that we ask that are going to get them comfortable. Well, actually, it's going to make them a little uncomfortable because there's going to be an element of dissatisfaction. But then we're going to couple it with the brightness of future so that they can get excited about making progress in the business or in the department or in their personal life. Now, as I look back on the large decisions I've made in my life, whether it was getting married, whether it was moving to North Carolina, whatever it was, I found that I followed a similar formula. I just didn't have the formula available to me at the time. So intuitively, this is how we make a lot of decisions, and now we've got a little math to back it up. So that's our formula for change. Now, usually, as part of the formula for change is the questioning process. We'll ask a question, they'll give us an answer. We'll ask another question to dive into their answer a little bit to make sure we understand it, number one, and make sure that we're moving down the right track with them, number two. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper. Another round of questions. All right, digging deeper, getting kind of to the heart of the matter. And then what will happen is, we'll hit some emotion, and then they'll ask us a question. How do we get started? What's the next step? How quick can you guys deliver? These are all great, very traditional buying signals. And it's when they've started to ask us a question, we can give them an answer, and we can go on with the process. So you'll notice there's lots of questioning on our part and getting them to talk more and more and more about the situation that they're trying to fix and to see if we are a good solution for that situation. And because we're taking this questioning approach, we're really twisting on its head the old selling techniques. So in the old selling, we really kind of broke it up into three categories. You've got rapport, you've got that selling, that sales process, and then you've got follow-up. How long are you going to be around? So if you think about the 5 ways, the selling part is the conversion area, and the follow-up part is the retention area or the number of transactions. Well, older selling, and I had this experience, I went to buy a car at the Jeep dealership in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it was 1994, and I got that classic line, and you know what the line is. What do I have to do to put you in this car today? Right? Classic. Well, that was the old kind of selling where they would go through lots of sharp angle closes. You look at this diamond, where not a lot of upfront, very little follow-up at the back, and a whole bunch of selling in the middle. Whether it's a Ben Franklin close, whether it's the sharp angle close, whether it's the puppy dog close, all ways to get people to say yes, even if it wasn't the right option for them. What we would submit to you is that we like the new style. And the new selling is a lot of rapport, making sure that we're the right fit, making sure that they're a good fit for what we do. Very little selling. And by that I mean the sale really becomes a very natural discussion around what do you want to accomplish and can we help you get there? And if the answer is yes, again, that's wonderful. If the answer is no, frankly, that's wonderful because, again, they're off the board. And then we stay and we follow up and we follow up and we follow up and we have lots of transactions, we have great retention, and they become great referral sources. So the new style of selling, not only is it more comfortable for people to go through the process, but also takes down our marketing expense because the right people stay around for a long time and they're able to become great referral sources for us. So that's old versus new selling. Similar to the questioning funnel, when you start to engage someone, you want to start with very open-ended questions, right? You want to stay away from the closed-ended, and closed-ended questions are yes, no. Open-ended, we get them to talk. So we talk about, the big W's, the who, the where, the what, the when, the whys, and the hows. Obviously, how is an H. Now, as we go through that, we go from open-ended to something a little bit more specific, but we're still drilling down. We're still playing dumb. We're still digging deep. We're going to give them a couple of solutions. We're going to check their temperature. This might be the NLP piece where we lean in. This might be something like, how does that fit with what you had in mind? Do you see this helping you out of your current situation? Well, we want to see where are they in the process. I had a guy today we were talking to about being a coach, and he's going to go to January training, it looks like. Again, the deal is never done until everything's done, but we're going in the right direction. And from a temperature perspective, I just finally said, I think you ought to go to January training. And he said, yeah, January training sounds right. So at least from a timing perspective, we're on the same page. Whether or not he goes or not, we'll know soon, but Hank, if you're listening, we'd love to have you be a coach in the Graham area. And then you want to confirm a detail. And that detail could be delivery time window, that detail could be the pricing, that detail could be how they're going to pay for it. But again, if you look at this funnel, we're very open in the beginning. It's like that inverted sales vacuum. We're open in the beginning, and then at the end, we're getting to the place where it's very natural for them to say yes. You might have some question softeners. So it's a little bit like public speaking. You can say the word so and drag the O out and then say anything you want. But as you start asking people questions, you don't need to be a high D and be come after them hard all the time. Can I just ask, by the way, incidentally, break into these questions so that they don't feel like they're under attack. And I guess that's what you're trying to avoid. You don't want the prospect to feel like they're under attack when you're asking them questions. So soften them up a little bit. And do the same with your kids and do the same with your spouse. It works across the board. Because what you're doing is it's a human being talking to a human being. Don't think of it as a sales process. It's two people that are talking and trying to relate to each other effectively. And whatever you can do to make those questions easier for them to understand, easier for them to embrace, the better off you're going to be. And the better off they're going to be. So another way to look at the question cycle, we ask a question. We have to listen to their answer. This is why people can't stand telemarketers that call you up and they'll say, is Mr. Broke there? And so they get my name wrong, and I've got a pretty easy name to follow, guys. And they'll say, well, how are you today, sir? And I'll say, well, not good. And they'll say, yep, I'm doing great too. And they'll go right into their spiel. Right? So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to the response, give them a positive stroke, demonstrate the fact that we're listening, and then ask another question. So this is that cycle. You've seen that one before up in the corner. Question, answer, we're digging deep, sale, emotion, they ask us a question, hey, we're on the right track. Okay? And I just happen to like the fact that there are 5 steps in there because I'm a 5-step sales process kind of guy. Yours might be better served at 4. Some people might have it better served at 6, but I've seemed to find that tracking 5 steps works pretty well for me. Now, oftentimes, and depending on what it is that what kind of market you're in, we may be talking to the wrong person that can make the decision. So getting a feel for, who's involved in the decision-making process. I'm not, you can phrase some of these questions the same way, and this one might sound a little bit aggressive to you, and that's fine if it does. In your sales process, though, you have to make sure that you're talking to the right person. Right? The person that can say yes. And if you're not, you need to get them engaged somehow. You don't want to spend a bunch of time talking to someone who can't make decisions and then have to rely on them to go be as effective as you are when they're talking to the person within the company that is making decisions. So give some thought to, and again, this is a good one to start with, but give some thought to what would be a good authority question that I can ask to make sure I'm talking to the right cat. Money obviously is important. So you have to have a question about money to make sure you're on the same page and can offer a solution that makes sense. You know, if you're selling pools and they've got $10,000 to spend or $20,000 to spend, you just move from an in-ground ornate pool with a waterfall to an above-ground pool probably, which is fine. You just don't want to come up with a $100,000 pool on a $10,000 budget. You'll be frustrated you invested the time. They'll be frustrated that you didn't listen and give them something they certainly can't afford. Right? So as part of your questioning, you know, authority, money, those are important things to understand. Now, you've gone through the process, and this is key, whether you say, based on what you've told me, because now they're the ones that own the information. Okay? Based on what you've told me, get their agreement, then either this or this color, that color, this timeline, that timeline. Now we're going to start making recommendations based on the information they've given us. And as we're doing that, we want to check the temperature. So how does that fit with what you had in mind? Is that about what you were thinking? Does that timing work for you? These are all temperature checking questions to make sure that we are in lockstep with what they're trying to accomplish, provided that we are the right solution to what they're after. Well, that stole it from me, but you've seen this one you've heard this one a couple of times already. How does that fit with what you had in mind? Very simple question to ask, not at all aggressive, and they'll say, yep, that's right. It'll be a little bit like Goldilocks and Three Bears. Yep, that sounds right. Or no, that's way too hot, or no, that's way too cold. And that hot and cold could be price, could be timing, could be a variety of things. Which one fits best with what you had in mind? So you've got a couple things that are options for them. Then you can present both and let them pick which one fits best for them. Great way to do it. Once they've made that decision, there's ownership there. Ask a detailed question. So really we're assuming the sale, but not from an arrogance perspective, but just saying, hey, we've come this far. I'm good at what I do. You need what I do. We've agreed as to what the best fit would be. So let's get started. Would it be okay to outline what we need to do to get that underway? If they say yes, hey, that's awesome. If they say no, then we have to go back to the questioning process. Somewhere along the way, we lost the rapport. Somewhere along the way, our NLP strategy of seeing how we were relating to each other, we've abandoned. And we now have to go back to, you know, what is it that's holding them up? And again, if they're a good fit for what we do, let's figure out how to get them through this hurdle. And ultimately, you're going to have to be comfortable with silence. So I'll always remember my first sales call. I asked the guy, you know, so what do you think? Would you like to get started? Or when would you like to get started? And I sat there for what felt like a day. It was quiet. He was looking at me. I was looking at him. It was like a good old-fashioned standoff. It probably, in reality, was about 8 seconds. And the guy said, yep, I think this makes sense. So give people space to make decisions and process information. Saying more, talking more, typically won't move you towards a sale. It'll move you away from a sale. You know, I joke around with my daughter Caitlin all the time, who's a junior now, and I'll say, when you make a sale and they say, yep, I'm ready, stop talking. Give them the information they need for the agreement, collect the agreement, collect the money, and then get started with delivering the product and service. You don't need to, if you have a 5-step sales process, and at step 3 the person says, yep, I'd like to buy, you don't say, yeah, hold on, pal, I've got 2 more steps. You get started. When you ask those questions that are going to get them to make a decision to say yes, give them the space to say yes, and resist the temptation to fill it with more words. A little bit of silence is fine, and I promise you, it's nowhere near as long as you think it is. Now, if you do get objections, no problem. Agree with the objection. But what you want to make sure is that you're agreeing with the actual objection. And so these next statements are really geared towards Am I actually handling the right objection, or am I going to solve something that's not really a problem? And that's why that second one, are there any other reasons besides whatever they just said? Now, typically objections fall around a couple of topics. There's money, there's their ability to make a decision, and there's time. And I guess the fourth one typically would be they just don't like you as a person. Chances are that last one is not that often when it happens. But there could be an objection around money, there could be an objection about time, and we want to make sure that we're solving the right objections, not just random objections that are coming up. Okay. So if they say, if that was okay, would you go ahead? If they say, yep, then great, let's jump into it. If they say no, well, let's find out what the real reason is. There's no sense solving an objection that's not real. And if you find the same objections over and over, you want to go ahead and build that into your marketing and early into your sales process. Because if you get to this point and you're at the end of the sales process, a couple things happen. Number one, you're all giddy excited because you're about to make a sale. Number two, you've invested a lot of emotion in getting to this point of making a sale. And number three, you've invested a lot of time and probably a decent amount of money, between lunches and travel and all that kind of good stuff, to get the candidate to a place where they're ready to say yes. So if we're going to have common objections, we want to put them early in the sales process so that people will bail out faster. I don't want to take people all the way through 5 steps for them to say no. I'd rather have them say no at step 2. Now, some other things about being a pro. And I love to always be on time. Have testimonials. Do your homework. Goodness, it's so easy to find out information about people today. Spend the 10 minutes looking at the website. Jump on their LinkedIn account. Know some stuff about the prospect before you actually get there so you can be more efficient. Work on your skills of building rapport. Always follow up. Send a thank you card. This isn't a criticism of send out cards. I like thank you notes to be handwritten. I like thank you postcards. I think they're great. Right? When I get a card now, I turn it over to make sure there's got a pen mark on the back as opposed to coming from a printer somewhere in a different part of the country. And if you think about that sales process, it's that consistency that's going to allow you to be better at conversion. Let's go back to the sales vacuum for a second and say, all right, we brought them in. We started to fine-tune our offer to them. We got them down to the right product and service based on our sales process. And now they're in the place where they're able to say yes. And that's what conversion is all about, getting people to a spot where they're able to say yes. They agreed to the terms, and now they become a shopper. And a shopper is someone who has bought once. So as we define a customer, they have to buy a second time. So at this point, they're a shopper. We've got the information, and now it's our job in the continuation of our sales process to move them from being a shopper to a customer so that they can come back again and again and again. Buy something and confirm their details. So we knew a little bit about them before. We know more about them now, which allows us to be better marketers, especially as they come in as our A and B kind of clients. Now, one thing before we get to the homework. There was one question that we haven't addressed yet that I want to make sure that we cover, and that is the sales process. So here's what you have to do. Everybody has Excel, so I need you to create an Excel spreadsheet. Across the top are going to be the steps of your sales process. Might have 3 steps, might have 5 steps. I think 3 is too few. I think 8 or 9 is too many. So you're going to be somewhere in that 4 to 7 range steps in your process. In the column on the left, I want you to start listing your prospects. And then I want you to start putting a 1 in every step they complete. So if they go 3 steps in the process, put a 1 in step 1, 2, and 3, and then shade that 3rd step red, because you know that that's where they said, nope, I'm not buying, or at least I'm not buying today. And you do this for everyone that comes into your business over the course of a month. Now, the individual entries per person are not that important. What becomes important are the totals. So as you add these all together, you're going to find that for every 10 people that come in or every 8 people that come in, 1 person becomes a client. The other thing you'll find is what happens along the way. Am I carrying 80% of the people to the last step and then they bail out? Where are people falling out? Because you want to see a reduction early in the number of prospects that are in the hopper so you don't invest time and money in people and emotion that aren't going to become clients. So one of the homework assignments is to go get Excel, lay out a sales process, and start tracking how far people go. What you may find, and what I have found in my sales process, is that between steps 2 and 3, I don't lose anybody. So if I'm not going to lose anybody, there's no sense in having those 2 different steps. I may as well consolidate them or do something else in step 3 so that I get my drop off early and not take them through steps 4 and 5. Okay? So go grab Excel, lay out a sales process, and send it to me, stevebrock@actioncoach.com, and I'd be happy to take a look at it. And now for the home fun. So we are going to create a sales process. We are going to have a purpose statement for each one. Again, it can be the same start of the purpose statement for each one, and then change the 2 or 3 things you're going to cover. If you need some collateral, we'll start making that sales kit. What's the brochure? What's the testimonial that you need? And I think testimonials come in 3 capacities. You have written testimonials. So if you can get those on letterhead, that's most important. And pictures of them are even better if you don't want to send out the hard copies. You've got audio testimonials. These are used the least, but it's where a client is talking about working with you. They can be very effective and certainly would appeal to people that are auditory. But what I find to be the best are the video testimonials. And they don't need to be testimonials where you bring someone into a studio and you pay quite a bit of money for it. They can just as simply be using your phone, recording a 15-second clip about how great it is to work with you, and then saving that and putting it up on hanging it on a website, put it on YouTube where you're going to listen to this. You've got lots of options there. The thing I would ask you to do in the video and the audio testimonials is the name of the person, the name of the company, and the location. The location is important because people like to buy from people that are similar to them in geography. So the testimonial from someone in Greensboro or Winston or High Point is much more valuable typically than a testimonial from someone in California or Chicago or Boston. Those are Yankees and Midwesterners and the land of fruits and nuts out there that perception-wise are different than people in Carolina. Now it might be the same exact person, but again, we want to make these to be as effective as possible, and by doing that, we want to have testimonials from people that will tell us that they are local because they are like us, and people like to buy from people like them. People like to be reinforced about a buying decision from people like them. Okay? So again, a little bit different today that we didn't have much interaction. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Really take the time now, and let's put together that sales process so that we can be more and more effective at conversion. If your conversion rate is 90% today, great, and let's spend as much money as possible on effective marketing. If your conversion rate is 10% today, then let's get that to 20%. Or if it's 20%, let's get it to 35%. Let's get that conversion rate up so that we can reduce our marketing spend and increase our revenue because we're more effective at talking to people and getting the right ones to say yes. Gang, thanks for your time today. Have a glorious weekend. Left hand out, right hand back. 1, 2, 3, and whoosh. Thanks, guys.